Callan had been shot before, but this one burned like hell. The blast had torn across his side, just beneath his ribs, and left a wet, pulsing heat that soaked through his jacket. Still, he ran. His boots slammed against the grated floor as the sterile white corridor twisted beneath flickering lights. Behind him, the shrill whine of sirens chased his every step, accompanied by the metallic clatter of armored boots gaining ground. He cursed under his breath. Of all the places to get pinned, it had to be a black zone auction facility on the outer rim of a dead system. His shoulder hit a corner wall as he turned sharply, lungs burning, blood smearing against smooth alloy. The corridor opened into a wide, curved chamber. Quiet, cold, humming with power. The air was sharp with ozone, like an overcharged circuit ready to blow. This wasn't a docking bay. This was something else. A soft blue glow lit the room in eerie gradients, casting long shadows across the arched ceiling. Rows of transparent enclosures lined the walls, each one a sealed glass chamber with a single occupant inside. There were creatures in every cell, some pacing, some snarling, others collapsed in sedation. One, covered in thick crimson fur, kept gnawing at the steel of its own restraints, its eyes glowing with dull madness. It hit him suddenly. This was no prison. It was a gallery, a zoo. Callan's grip tightened around his pulse pistol. He took a cautious step forward, scanning. Every creature in here had been taken, hunted, packaged, labeled, and now displayed. But then he saw her. At first she didn't move, just stood in the farthest enclosure, a pale, still figure beneath the soft shimmer of containment glass. Her skin was a rich, iridescent violet, like twilight over deep water. Not scales, not fur, just smooth, delicate skin that glowed faintly under the artificial light. Her hair was long, black as deep space, falling past her shoulders in loose waves threaded with strands of metallic silver. She wore little, thin ornamental fabrics and restraints, more for aesthetic than function. No visible weapons, no visible fear. Just her eyes, wide, obsidian, ancient in their silence, watching him. He took a step closer. She didn't flinch, but she didn't cower either. No fight, no submission, just stillness. Her face was unreadable, but her posture said everything. She'd stood there too long, too quietly, like she had stopped being a person a long time ago. A nameplate near the glass read nothing but a catalog number in alien script, not even a species designation, just a number. And unlike the other creatures, slobbering, sedated, pacing in madness, she was awake, fully aware. That shouldn't have been possible. Callan looked up, his breath fogging faintly against the glass. She met his gaze without blinking, without moving a single muscle. He whispered, barely audible, "What the hell are you?" But the real question was, what the hell were they doing with her? He glanced over his shoulder. No guards, yet. Just the pulsing glow of red lights flashing down the distant corridor, signaling the lockdown sequence. His time was running out. He turned back to the glass and lifted his hands slowly, fingers splayed open. Not a threat, just a gesture, human, simple, a reach. For a moment she didn't react. Then, so slight he almost missed it, her hand twitched. It rose, not all the way, not touching the glass, just hovering there, halfway between him and the invisible barrier. Her fingers curled, uncertain. Callan's chest tightened. She recognized the gesture. He didn't know why he was still standing there. He should have kept running. He had a bounty on his head, a shattered comlink, a bruised lung, and now a plasma burn leaking blood down his side. The merc job had gone sideways fast, ambushed during a weapons handoff, caught between a rival cartel and a patrol from the galactic regulators. He was lucky to escape with breath in his chest. But now? He was bleeding out in front of a bioglass enclosure in the heart of a black market exhibit hall, staring at a violet-skinned alien girl who hadn't spoken, hadn't moved, yet was more alive than anything else in the room. His hand dropped to the access panel beside the enclosure. The interface lit up in jagged alien runes, language he didn't speak fluently, but enough to get by. The glass hissed in warning. He hesitated. She didn't. Her eyes met his, steady, not hopeful, not pleading, just waiting. She had no reason to trust him, and honestly, he didn't have a good reason to help her either, except maybe one, because once, long ago, he'd known someone who looked just like that. Not on the outside, no, but in the eyes. Someone who'd stopped fighting because the world had broken every part of them that could still push back, and he hadn't saved that person. This time, maybe he could. "Don't make me regret this," he muttered. His fingers flew across the control pad. Sparks burst from the panel as he bypassed the security seal. Alarms shrieked louder, this time localized. The chamber locks disengaged with a loud mechanical click, and a fine vapor hissed from the seams as the glass retracted. For the first time, the air between them was real, shared. She didn't bolt, didn't cower. She just stood there. Callan took one slow step inside. Up close, she looked even more alien and even more human than he expected. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Her limbs, though slim, looked strong, built for motion, not passivity. Her gaze locked onto his, unwavering. He offered his hand again, closer now. Her hand twitched once more before she finally lifted it, hesitant, unsure, and touched his. Her skin was warm, not cold, not clammy, just warm. Something flickered in her eyes, something small like the first spark of a flame in a frozen cave. Then the corridor behind them lit up with the rhythmic pounding of boots. "They're coming," he whispered, stepping closer. "We need to move." She didn't nod, didn't speak. But when he reached for her, this time she didn't pull away. He scooped her into his arms carefully. She was light, deceptively so. The ornamental shackles around her ankles jingled softly, but she didn't resist. She pressed her face into the curve of his neck like she was preparing for whatever came next, and she held on. As he turned and sprinted toward the emergency shaft, Callan's mind raced. She wasn't just a prisoner, she wasn't a creature, she was someone. And someone had gone to great lengths to silence that truth. As he punched the override panel and the emergency doors began to groan open, a single thought echoed in his skull, quiet, but resolute. "This is the dumbest thing I've ever done." But somewhere underneath that, deeper and harder to ignore. And the only one that's ever felt right. Behind them, the gallery descended into chaos. Ahead, the dark swallowed them whole. The emergency shaft groaned as the panel doors slid shut behind them. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the rapid, uneven cadence of Callan's breath and the distant thuds of enforcer boots storming the corridors above. The girl, no, the woman, lay still in his arms, light as smoke but tense as a coiled wire. Her violet skin was warm against his blood-soaked side, her long dark hair brushing against the hollow of his throat with every shaky step he took deeper into the maintenance tunnels. She hadn't spoken, hadn't asked where they were going. She hadn't even looked at him since the cell opened, but she hadn't let go either. He staggered forward, one arm gripping her and the other guiding them through the underbelly of the station, dimly lit, reeking of coolant, oil, and rot. The farther down they went, the more the station changed. From pristine corridors and surveillance grids to rusted panels and hacked bulkheads where systems flickered, half dead. These tunnels weren't on any official map. That's why he'd picked them. The pain in his side flared again. He bit back a groan. Not now. Not while they were still this exposed. He reached a small alcove behind a blown-out generator core and ducked inside, lowering her gently to the floor. She sat without a word, pulling her knees to her chest like muscle memory, as if she'd spent her entire life trying to take up less space. Callan collapsed against the far wall, chest heaving, hand pressed to his wound. The blood was sticky now, drying, and the burn around the edges told him it wasn't just superficial. Not fatal either. Not yet, but it was going to hurt like hell in the next few hours. The silence stretched. She didn't look at him, just sat curled on the cold metal floor, her fingers lightly brushing the ornamental bands still clinging to her wrists. Her expression was blank, too blank. Callan reached into his jacket, fumbled out a compact med-gel capsule, and activated it with a press. The applicator hissed softly. He winced as he injected it into his side. A wave of cold numbness spread through his abdomen, muting the pain just enough to keep him upright. His eyes drifted back to her. "You okay?" She didn't respond. Not a nod. Not a blink. "I mean, I know you're not, but—" He exhaled, tilting his head back against the bulkhead, voice low, almost to himself. "Just figured I'd ask." Another beat of silence. She was shaking now, barely visible, just the subtlest tremor through her arms and shoulders. Still not crying, still not speaking, but her breathing had changed, quicker, shallow, like she was trying to hold it in. Callan's gaze softened. She wasn't feral, like the others. She hadn't lunged, hadn't attacked, hadn't screamed. She'd just held herself still, controlled, conditioned, which made it worse. "You don't have to talk," he said gently. "But if you can understand me, just blink." Once. She turned her head slightly, not much, but enough to look at him now, face shadowed beneath tangled strands of dark hair. And then, one slow, deliberate blink. Callan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "All right, that's a start." He reached out carefully, pulling off one of his gloves. His hand was rough, scarred, streaked with dried blood. He moved slowly, showing her the empty palm. "I'm not going to touch you," he said. "Not unless you want me to." She looked down at his hand, then at his face. Her brows furrowed faintly, like the concept itself confused her. Permission. Callan wasn't sure what they'd done to her, but it didn't take much imagination. The collar, the display, the silence. The others in cages next to her, drugged or snarling. She'd been made to seem rare, valuable, even beautiful. But beneath all that, she'd still been treated the same way all animals were, owned. He swallowed hard and looked away. Place like that shouldn't exist. His voice was tighter now, angrier. "I've seen slaver dens before," he muttered. "Cartels selling labor stock, black market breeders, hell, even vivisection farms in the outer moons. But that place? That wasn't just cruelty, that was art." He spat the word like it tasted wrong. She shifted slightly at that. Not much, just an adjustment of her arms, her fingers curling in toward her chest. But it told him something. She was listening. "You're not from this system," he said. "Neither am I." A pause. "I'm Callan. I don't work for anyone. I used to a long time ago, but now I just move cargo. No questions, no flags. Keeps people from asking about scars. Still nothing." But her head tilted just a fraction, like she was trying to follow. "I got hit during a job," he explained, nodding to his side. "Didn't expect double-crossing clients with military drones." His tone shifted, dry and edged with sarcasm. "Should have known better. I always know better. I just don't care." Another pause. Then quietly he added, "But today felt different." She looked up. Callan met her gaze. "You looked at me, back there, through the glass. And not like I was another set of boots or a threat. You looked like you recognized something." Her lips parted, just barely. Not a word. Just the idea of one. The quiet between them settled again. But it wasn't cold this time. It was waiting. He pulled off his jacket and held it out. She stared at it like it was a foreign object. Her eyes darted between him and the fabric. Then slowly, she reached out with shaking fingers and took it, not to wear, just to hold. Callan watched her curl the jacket in her arms like it was a shield. She drew it close to her chest, gripping it tighter than he expected. And for the first time, she spoke, voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Why?" He blinked. "Why what?" Her eyes were dark, bottomless. "Why didn't you leave me?" Callan didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands, at the dried blood beneath his nails, at the bruises along his knuckles from breaking the stasis locks. He leaned his head back again, closed his eyes. "Because I saw you," he said finally, "and I knew what it meant to be left behind." When he looked up, she was still watching him. Something in her had shifted, not softened. No, softness didn't come that easy, but loosened, cracked. A hairline fracture in a wall that had been built stone by stone over years. Callan lowered his voice. "You got a name?" She didn't answer, but the pause that followed didn't feel like defiance. It felt like loss. She didn't have one. He nodded quietly to himself. "That's okay, we'll find one." As the hum of distant engines echoed above and the soft metallic creaks of the station groaned through the pipes, Callan rested his head against the bulkhead, one eye still on her. And for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel so empty. Not because they were safe, but because they weren't alone. And somewhere in that dark, rusted crawl space beneath a city of monsters and collectors, the first spark of something human, something unbroken, began to flicker between them. Not love, not yet, but trust. And for now, that was enough. The moons were rising over Threk's Null when they found shelter. Not that Callan had ever been the poetic type, but even he had to admit. 3 fractured moons climbing above a rust-colored desert, light refracting through atmospheric haze like shards of glass. That was something. Their stolen transport had barely made it to the planet's surface. Its hull was scorched from re-entry, and one of the stabilizers coughed out sparks on landing before finally dying in a burst of acrid smoke. Still, they made it. Far enough from the outpost. Far enough from the tracking beacons. For now, they were ghosts. He helped her down the ramp slowly. She was stronger than she looked, but the silence between them hadn't changed. Her grip on his arm was steady but light, like she still wasn't sure she had the right to lean on someone. She hadn't spoken again since the tunnels. Not a single word. The terrain was desolate. Red sand stretching out like blood-soaked ash beneath a violet sky. The wind was dry but biting, dragging tiny shards of dust across exposed skin. Callan led her toward the remains of a collapsed comm station half buried in the sand. The structure tilted at a precarious angle, but inside it offered cover, steel bones still holding against time. He scanned for life signs. Nothing nearby. Power was long dead. Good. They climbed inside without speaking. She settled into a corner without a sound, drawing her knees to her chest again, the oversized jacket he'd given her still wrapped around her thin frame like armor. She wasn't trembling this time, but her posture was the same. Guarded, distant, observant. Callan set up a small thermal coil in the middle of the ruined floor and sparked it to life. Pale orange light flickered across rusted walls, dancing shadows across her face. It was the first warmth they'd had in hours. He sat on the opposite side, stretching his legs out with a quiet sigh. His side still ached, but the med gel had numbed most of the worst of it. He'd have to deal with the deeper healing later. Right now, what he needed more than anything was rest. But she didn't sleep. She hadn't even tried. She just watched the flames, blinking slowly, like she wasn't entirely convinced they were real. Callan broke the silence first. This place is off-grid. Old mining system, barely charted, no colonies, no ports, just wreckage. No reply. I come here when things get messy, he added, which it is more often than I'd like. Still nothing. He shifted, watching her. I used to have a crew, years ago. We pulled salvage runs in dead sectors. Quiet work, good coin, until one job went bad. Woke up in a med bay half a system away. No ship, no crew, no explanation. That got her attention. Barely, but it was there. A tilt of her head, a flicker of something in her eyes. They sold me out, he said. Didn't even leave a message. Just a hole in my gut and a new set of enemies. He let the words hang. I didn't trust anyone after that. Still don't. Silence. Then quietly, so faint he almost missed it, she spoke. Why tell me? Her voice was raw, sanded down by silence and disuse, but it was clear. Callan shrugged. I don't know. Maybe because you're the only one not trying to sell me out this week. She glanced away, her expression unreadable in the firelight. He leaned forward slightly. What about you? Got any stories? She hesitated. Then with effort, I don't remember the beginning. Callan didn't press. He let her take her time. I remember cold, she said after a pause, and silence. I was in a cell for a long time, then another, then a cage. I learned not to move, not to ask. They like you better when you're quiet. Callan's jaw clenched. Who were they? Collectors, merchants, scientists. She blinked. They paid to watch me. He swallowed hard. Why? She shook her head, a slow, almost mechanical motion. Because I was rare, pretty, not like the others. Callan looked down at the coil, fingers tightening around his knees. They thought I was delicate, she continued, almost to herself. But I remember things. I remember blood, screaming. I wasn't always in a cage. He looked up. What's your name? She flinched. I don't remember, she whispered. Callan's voice dropped. Then we'll find you one. Her eyes met his across the flame, and for the first time, she didn't look away. The fire crackled softly between them, casting flickers of gold and copper across her skin. In the light, the faint pattern of ridges beneath her collarbone became visible, delicate, almost floral. Her kind was unlike anything he'd seen in the outer systems, and yet something about her felt closer to human than most of the monsters he'd worked for. He caught himself staring and cleared his throat. You're not fragile, he said quietly. She blinked, confused. You didn't scream when the glass broke. You didn't run. You watched. You waited. You're not broken. You've been surviving. The silence between them softened, just a little. Then she said something that made his heart pause. They taught me how to look pretty when I was afraid. Callan didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his belt pouch and pulled out a thin silver packet, a food ration. He tossed it toward her. She caught it out of reflex, then looked at it suspiciously. "Eat," he said. "It's disgusting, but it won't kill you." She unwrapped it slowly, sniffed it, then took a bite. Her nose wrinkled, but she kept chewing. He smirked. "Told you." A flicker of something almost like amusement passed through her eyes. Gone in an instant. But it had been there. They didn't speak again for a while. The night on Threxnall was quiet, save for the wind skimming across rusted steel and empty dunes. Eventually, her posture shifted. She slid closer to the coil, eyes growing heavy. Her head nodded once, twice. Callan laid his jacket beside her without a word and leaned against the wall, blaster still in reach, senses half awake. Just in case, but she didn't curl into herself this time. She lay down, slowly, softly. And in the silence that followed, as the fire faded to embers, Callan let himself believe, just briefly, that maybe they could make it out of this alive. Maybe. The galaxy had a habit of proving him wrong, but something in her eyes had said otherwise. And for the first time in years, he wasn't entirely sure which one he believed more. The wind had changed. Callan noticed it first, not by the sound, but by the weight it carried. A dry shift in the air, a ripple beneath the usual howls across the Threxnall sands. There was silence, and then something deeper, a pressure, subtle but immediate, as if the world were holding its breath. He pushed off the wall where he'd been leaning, quietly without waking her. She was curled near the fire, the jacket still wrapped around her, one arm tucked under her head. Her breathing was light but steady, and in sleep her face had softened, almost enough to forget the raw tension that usually lived behind her eyes. For a moment she looked young, peaceful, almost human. But peace never lasted in places like this. Callan slipped out of the ruined shelter and into the night, his boots soundless against the sand-covered metal. The sky was awash in a dull indigo glow, the smallest of Threxnall's moons rising jagged over the horizon, casting warped shadows across the wreckage. He tapped the side of his pistol, activating the low-range scanner embedded in the grip. No signatures, but he wasn't convinced. He moved in a slow arc around the perimeter, his eyes scanning the dunes. Jagged fragments of derelict mining rigs dotted the landscape like forgotten bones. The faint smell of oxidized metal and dry minerals filled the air, cleaner than most outer system worlds, but still sterile. Still dead, a sound, subtle, a metallic click. Something small brushing past rusted plating. He froze. Another. Movement, low to the ground, fast, shadow slipping between the wreckage. Not humanoid, not heavy, scrappling. He lowered the pistol slightly. It wasn't a threat, not really. More a scavenger than a predator. Small, wiry, nocturnal. A desert-born creature native to ruined worlds like this. They hunted for parts, warmth, anything shiny enough to carry off. Some traveled in pairs, some alone. Most were harmless. But when desperate, Callan didn't want to take chances. "Not tonight," he muttered. The scrappling noticed him too late. It skittered to a halt, eyes wide and luminescent, clutching a jagged shard of metal like a dagger. A quiet hiss slipped from its throat. Not a challenge, just instinct. Callan didn't move. "I'm not your enemy." The creature darted off without a fight, vanishing behind a broken generator coil. No pursuit, no interest. Still, it left something behind. The stillness that followed wasn't right. The wind hadn't returned. Callan stayed out a few moments longer, scanning, waiting, but there was nothing else. Just the night, just the cold. He finally turned back toward the shelter, and she was awake. Standing at the threshold, arms wrapped around herself, violet skin silvered under the moonlight. Her hair caught the breeze in long strands, wild and free in a way that felt unintentional, like the wind was still trying to untangle what had been bound for too long. "You followed it?" she asked softly. "I followed the silence," Callan replied, stepping past her. "Sound lies. Silence doesn't." She said nothing, just watched him as he reignited the thermal coil. The warmth bloomed again slowly, casting flickers of orange light across the warped metal walls. They sat not quite together, but not apart either. This time it was she who broke the silence first. "That creature, it was afraid." Callan nodded. "Everything's afraid out here. And yet you didn't shoot." "Didn't need to." She tilted her head slightly. "But you would have, if you had to." His expression didn't shift, but his voice did, cool and clear. "If something threatens me or someone I protect, I end it. That's not cruelty. That's survival." She looked down at her hands. fingers brushing across the worn leather of the jacket in her lap. Where I was kept, they killed things. Because they could. Callan said nothing. I watched them burn a Rulian cub alive, just to see what pitch its cries would hit under pain. Her voice didn't tremble. She wasn't reliving the horror. She was stating a fact, like reciting numbers. The others screamed. I didn't. I thought that made me stronger. It did, he said quietly. She looked up, startled by his certainty. Callan leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on his knees. Enduring doesn't make you weak. It means you've survived what should have broken you. They sat with that truth for a while. It didn't need to be explained. It didn't need to be challenged. Then her eyes flicked to him. You said you don't trust people. I don't. But you trust me. No, he said, then added, not yet. Then why save me? Callan exhaled, slow and deliberate. Because I saw you. She stared, unsure what that meant. I've walked through plenty of places like that gallery, he continued, passed by cages, labs, display windows. You see things behind glass long enough, you stop looking, you stop seeing people. But when I looked at you, you looked back. I was afraid. No, he said, meeting her gaze. You were aware. That's different. You saw me, not like prey sees a predator, like someone who used to be free. That struck something in her. She stood suddenly and began pacing the perimeter, restless. Callan didn't stop her. Finally, she spoke. I remember a river and trees that glowed when they bloomed. I remember wind that didn't carry dust. I think I had a mother, or something like it. She wore her hair like mine, and she hummed. Callan stood slowly. That's something. I forgot her voice. That's what time does. But remembering even one sound is enough to find your way back. She turned, facing him. What if there's nothing to return to? Then you build something new, he said. Piece by piece. The fire crackled softly between them. No wind now. Just warmth. Just breathe. You still haven't named me, she said, not accusing, just observing. I was waiting for the right moment. She stepped closer. He watched her carefully. Do you want one? She nodded. Callan studied her face for a long moment, the angles of it, the strength carved behind soft lines, the eyes that had seen too much and refused to shut. Leora, he said at last. She blinked. What does it mean? It's old, he said. From Earth. It means light. She repeated it under her breath, like testing the sound of something almost sacred. Leora. And then, for the first time since they'd escaped the zoo, she smiled. It was small, fragile, like something blooming in frost. But it was real. He smiled too, just a little. You're not property anymore, he said, and you're not nameless. She stepped beside him, just close enough for her shoulder to brush his. I wasn't nameless, she said softly. They just never asked. They stood like that for a while, two figures bathed in the glow of a stolen fire, on a dead world, beneath a sky full of broken stars. Not friends yet, not safe. But something had shifted, not the world, the space between them. And this time it felt like something that couldn't be taken. Callan didn't say a word, but the way he moved gave it away. Each step down the tower's narrow stairwell was slower than the last. His left arm clutched his side tighter now, fingers curled into his jacket like he was holding something in. Pain, blood, maybe both. Leora had been watching him from the moment they left the shelter, but now, in the shadows of the old communication tower, her observations shifted from passive to piercing. Something was wrong, and it wasn't just exhaustion. They reached the substation at the base of the tower, buried deep beneath sand and scrap. The room was dark, damp with condensation, and faintly humming. Some kind of auxiliary power still lingered. Leora's boots crunched over scattered debris as she stepped lightly behind him. She could smell blood now, rusty, sharp. Callan dropped his bag beside a rusted control panel, then leaned heavily against the console, his breath ragged. He tried to hide it. He always did. But even shadows couldn't mask how pale his skin had gone beneath the grime. You're bleeding again, she said, quiet but firm. I'm fine, he replied automatically. You're not. His eyes flicked up to her, hollow, tired, stubborn. It's just from before, he muttered. The hit I took on Jorvin Port. It reopened during the walk. Nothing new. That was days ago. Exactly. Old pain. I'm used to it. She stepped closer, her voice steady now. Used to it doesn't mean surviving it. Callan didn't answer. He slid down the wall instead, slowly, carefully, until he was sitting on the floor. He pressed his hand harder into his side, jaw tight. Leora crouched in front of him. "Take off your jacket," she said. "Not necessary. Take it off." This time it wasn't a request. Callan stared at her, then let out a slow breath. He didn't argue again. With a wince, he peeled off the jacket and shirt beneath, revealing the wound. The fabric was soaked through, the skin underneath raw and torn. Around the edges, the flesh had begun to blister slightly, a sign of chemical burn. The med gel he'd used before had worked only on the surface. She didn't flinch. Instead, she scanned the room, then moved quickly to a wall-mounted cabinet, one of the old emergency caches. It had been pried open years ago, but inside, something shimmered faintly under dust. She pulled out a sealed med pack, still viable. The label read in both Common and Galactic Standard, Advanced Coagulant plus Cellular Binder. When she turned back, Callan had his eyes closed. Sweat trickled down his temple. He looked like he was trying not to black out. Leora knelt beside him and tore open the pack. The scent of antiseptic chemicals hit the air. "This will hurt," she warned. He let out a dry laugh. "Wouldn't feel right if it didn't." She applied the gel gently but firmly. The skin hissed on contact. Callan sucked in a sharp breath, fingers digging into the floor. Leora didn't stop. Her hands were steady, precise. "I thought you said you didn't remember your past," Callan murmured. "I don't. Not all of it. But you know what you're doing." She paused, then continued cleaning the wound. "Some things stay in the hands even when the mind forgets." His gaze shifted to her, not with suspicion, but curiosity, a quiet respect. When she was done, she bandaged him carefully, her fingers brushing against his ribs. His skin jumped slightly at her touch, but he didn't pull away. "You've done this before," he said softly. "Maybe." Leora looked up. Their eyes met. This time there was no fear in hers, no hesitation, only clarity. She sat back on her heels. "You need rest, and real food." He leaned his head against the wall. "You're starting to sound like someone who cares." She didn't respond, not with words. Instead, she stood and moved to a small drawer near the base of the console. After rummaging through old supplies, she pulled out a thermal kettle and a half-sealed packet of human military rations. Stale, but edible. She heated them in silence, and Callan let her. The air inside the substation warmed slightly as the food processed. The scent wasn't pleasant, processed proteins and rehydrated grain, but it was nourishment. She handed him a portion in silence. He took it with a faint nod. They ate without speaking at first, but something in the air between them had changed. Something open, easier. Finally, Callan asked, "Where did you learn not to panic?" Leora didn't look at him. "When you panic, they win." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's true." She glanced up. "Do you still panic?" "Only when I'm pretending I don't." A pause. Then unexpectedly, Leora said, "Thank you." Callan blinked. "For what?" "For naming me. For bleeding and not running. For treating me like I'm not fragile." "You're not," she hesitated. "I was afraid of you. At first. I know. But not now." He set the food down beside him, then leaned forward, his voice quiet. "Why not?" Leora didn't answer right away. Then slowly she reached out and brushed her fingers across his hand. "Because you bled for me," she said. "Not like the ones who took. You bled and didn't ask for anything back." Callan swallowed. The space between them felt warmer than the fire ever had. "I don't expect anything from you," he said, "but I'm here, as long as you want me to be." She didn't smile, but she didn't let go of his hand either. Outside, the wind had shifted again, but this time it carried no threat, just the slow promise of something growing, something healing, not just wounds, but the two of them, together. The hum beneath their feet wasn't coming from decay. It was coming from something alive, something listening. Leora felt it first. That pulse, faint but rising, in the bones of the old tower. Like a heartbeat too regular to be natural. Like something was waiting. She stared at the data tag in Callan's hand, the faded emblem of the Red Spiral Cartel etched into its alloy. It shouldn't have meant anything, not after everything they'd burned behind them, but it did. She'd seen that crest before, more than once. It had adorned the doors of auction blocks and the control panels of her cages. It was on the collars, on the walls, on the gloves of the ones who handled her like cargo. It was always there, watching, branding. Now it was here, in the structure they'd taken refuge in. Callan's face darkened. He moved quickly to the wall-mounted relay and popped open the access panel with a hiss of static. Inside, the wiring wasn't rusted like everything else. It was pristine, new, active. "Damn it," he muttered. "This tower's still transmitting." Leora's voice was quiet but sharp. They knew someone would come. Worse, they wanted someone to. He tapped the interface. A blinking loop beacon, encrypted and pulsing in narrowband, was bouncing off local satellites. He couldn't tell how long it had been active. Hours, maybe days. "What does that mean?" she asked. Callan's jaw tightened. "It means they're on their way." As if in answer, the lights overhead flickered and then turned red. Warning pulses. Silent alarms. It wasn't just a trap, it was a trigger. "We're not alone anymore," Callan said. "Time to move." He grabbed his pack and turned for the stairs, but Leora stood still, her eyes not on the walls, not on the flickering lights, but on herself. Her breathing didn't quicken. Her shoulders didn't shake. Something had changed. "No," she said. Callan froze. "No, we don't run. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and sitting in a tower rigged like a hunting blind. We need to— They will never stop hunting me," she said, her voice firm. "If we run now, we'll keep running. Forever." He hesitated. She stepped forward. "You said once that surviving doesn't mean you're weak, but I'm done just surviving." The look in her eyes, steady, bright, unwavering, stopped him cold. She wasn't asking him to fight. She was telling him that she would. And he realized this wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't even about them. It was about standing her ground, about refusing to be hunted. Callan gave a tight nod. "Then we hold here, high ground, bottleneck." They climbed fast, up rusting metal stairs to the tower's top platform, half open, half ruined. The floor vibrated beneath their boots, and far below the wind shifted, the kind of shift that came with engines. Callan dropped to one knee beside a half-buried locker and yanked it open. Inside, 2 pulse rifles, dust-coated but functional, old smuggler grade. He tossed one to Leora. "You ever fired one?" She locked the chamber like second nature. "They made me." "Well," he said, "they're about to regret it." A rumble rose from the horizon. Fast, low, heavily tuned speeder bikes, 6, maybe 7, kicking up dust clouds as they sliced across the desert toward them. The red spiral, no insignias, no lights, just matte black gear and cold intent. Leora dropped to her stomach and sighted down her rifle, steady as breath. Callan prepped the backup detonator wired to the tower's power core. "If we can't stop them," he said, "we take the node out with us." Leora didn't look up. "You're not dying today." "Didn't say I wanted to. Just that I have options." A pulse of movement. The first shot tore through a railing an inch from Leora's head. She rolled, fired. One of the bikes veered off course, skidding into a dune. Return fire rained up at them. Coordinated, they were being flushed out. Callan popped 2 shots in rhythm, dropping a second rider. "Not scouts," he called. "Kill squad. They're here to erase everything." "And I'm not done being someone," Leora muttered. Then she moved. She dropped from the top level to the scaffolding below, landing hard on bent metal, sliding into better cover. Another bolt grazed her thigh, but she didn't slow. Callan watched her, his gut twisting, not in fear but in something deeper. She moved like a weapon made for more than cages. Fluid, precise. He refocused and fired again, covering her as she took out a drone that had started circling the tower. Then, silence. A pause. One rider had dismounted. He moved on foot, faster than the rest, heavily armored. A shock baton lit in his hand, humming with power. He was coming up the stairwell. "Leora," Callan shouted, "we've got a breach." She was already moving. She met the attacker 2 levels down, rifle held like a staff. No time to shoot. The baton hissed as it sliced the air, nearly catching her side. She ducked under the arc and slammed the butt of the rifle into his ribs. He grunted, staggered, came back twice as hard. But she didn't flinch. She waited for the overreach, then spun, swept his legs, and dropped him flat on the metal. The second blow cracked his helmet. The third ended the fight. She stood over him, panting, blood on her knuckles, her jaw clenched. She wasn't a prisoner anymore. She was someone who fought back. Callan had seen soldiers. He'd seen survivors. He'd never seen someone become both in a single second. He hit the console, activated the override on the core, and yelled, "Leora, time to go!" The tower groaned beneath their feet, metal warping as energy surged from the foundation. She scrambled back to the upper platform. Callan had already rigged a descent line from the cargo chute. He clipped her in. "Jump," he said. She hesitated. "You? I'm not dying in this junk heap. Go." She didn't question him again. She leapt. He followed half a breath later. Behind them, the tower detonated, not in a ball of flame, but in a flash of blinding white as the power core overloaded. A shockwave of electromagnetic fire swept across the landscape, frying systems, wiping traces. The beacon, destroyed. The red spiral's trail, burned. They hit the sand hard, rolling in a cloud of dust. Heat rippled around them, but the air was silent. No more engines, no more riders. Leora pulled herself upright. Her arm was scraped, her leg bruised, but she was breathing. She looked to her left. Callan was lying still. "Callan!" she cried, scrambling over. He stirred with a groan. "Still alive, but damn!" She helped him sit up, his weight slumping against her shoulder. He looked at her, eyes glassy but focused. "You all right?" he rasped. Leora nodded. "You?" He let out a strained laugh. "Ask me when I stop seeing three of you." She didn't smile. Not this time. Instead, she leaned in, pressed her forehead gently against his. "I told you," she whispered. "This time I protect you." His breath caught. He looked at her, really looked, and in her eyes there was no fear. Only fire, only freedom. They stayed there for a moment, two figures in the wreckage of what was meant to break them. And for the first time since their paths had collided, Callan didn't feel like a man being hunted. He felt found. And together, they rose, one step at a time, toward whatever future they would choose next. Because now, it belonged to them. The sunrise bled slowly over the edge of the hill, soft light spilling through the open window of the cabin. It painted the worn wooden floor in shades of amber and rose, creeping gently across Callan's still sleeping form. He stirred under the blanket, breath shallow but steady, eyes fluttering before they opened. The first thing he felt was the ache in his shoulder, a tight, deep throb that tugged with every movement. Fresh. The clean-through blast he'd taken during the spiral's last assault hadn't hit anything fatal, but it would take time to mend. The second thing he felt was warmth, not sunlight, not from the thin thermal blanket either. Leora. She was curled on the cot beside him, not touching, but close enough that her breath stirred the short strands of hair on his temple. Her knees were drawn up slightly, one hand resting near his. The other clutched the data slate she'd fallen asleep reading. She'd taken to writing again, not in common, not in the languages of the collectors, but in her own. He turned his head slowly, careful not to wake her, and watched the rise and fall of her shoulders. Her hair was slightly tangled. Her face relaxed in sleep, but there was something else there too. Something she hadn't had before. Peace, not safety. That came and went like weather. But something in her posture, in her breathing, told him she no longer expected a knife at her back. He closed his eyes again, not to sleep, but just to feel it. Stillness. Later, when the scent of hot water and toasted grains drifted through the open door, he heard her move. Bare feet on the floor. The soft rustle of fabric, a kettle placed on the stove. When he sat up, she turned. "You should be resting." "I've rested enough," he said, voice still gravelly. "And I smell food." Leora gave a small smile. "It's just rehydrated grain and root powder." He shrugged, winced, then grinned. Luxury. She walked over, carrying a chipped ceramic mug, and handed it to him. He looked up at her, really looked. The bruises on her cheek had faded. The old ornamental bindings that had scarred her wrists were long gone. Her posture had changed too. She no longer moved like someone who was waiting to be punished for existing. "Sleep okay?" he asked. She nodded. "First night without waking up afraid." Callan sipped the bitter drink. "That makes one of us." She tilted her head. "Nightmares?" "Number just not used to waking up and feeling like nothing's after me." Leora sat beside him. "We're not safe, not forever." "No," he said. "But for now? This is the quietest moment I've had in a decade." She didn't answer, just sipped from her own mug. Then softly, "Your side? Healing. Your shoulder?" He smiled crookedly. "Still hurts like hell." She placed her mug down and reached for the edge of his shirt. "May I?" His breath caught for a moment. He nodded. She peeled back the fabric gently, revealing the bandage on his shoulder. Her fingers brushed over the skin, warm and feather-light. "It's closing well," she said. "I used the good sealant. You used everything you had. And I'd do it again." He looked at her then, eyes steady. "I know." She didn't pull away. Her fingers lingered, tracing just beneath the gauze. She wasn't shaking this time. Her touch wasn't afraid. It was intentional. Callan reached up slowly and placed his hand over hers. "I never thought I'd have this," he said quietly. "Not the quiet, not the chance." Leora met his gaze. "I didn't even know I wanted it, until you." The air between them shifted, not tense, not hesitant, just filled with something unspoken, waiting to be named. Her thumb brushed over the side of his hand, then she leaned in. Their foreheads touched first, like always, like it was still safe, still familiar. But then she tilted her head and kissed him. It wasn't urgent or dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was slow, warm, and steady, like breath returning after too long underwater. Her lips were soft. His were cracked and bruised. But it didn't matter. They weren't healing just wounds. They were healing the spaces between them. When they parted, Callan didn't open his eyes right away. He just pressed his forehead to hers again, his breath caught halfway between relief and awe. "You're sure?" he asked. "I've never been more sure of anything," she whispered. Outside, wind rustled through the leaves. A bird called from a nearby branch. No alarms, no boots, no bars. Only the sound of life moving forward. She pulled away, just enough to look into his eyes. "You still want to leave one day?" He thought about it, about the stars, the missions, the long corridors and cold holds of forgotten ships. "No," he said. "Not if you're here." She nodded once. "Then let's stay. Let's build." "Build what?" "A life." He laughed, quiet, breathless. "That's the first time anyone's ever asked me for that." "I'm not asking," she said with a smirk. He grinned. "Good.